News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
So I have had quite a unique and I would say innovative professional and educational journey. I started out very young in the theatre and film industry, and I then went into teaching, and I was doing arts-based education for a number of years. I was teaching in prisons, and a lot of my students and clients were saying things to me which felt very heavy, and I realized naturally that I have some listening gifts here, but I'm not equipped to hold a lot of what these people are telling me. So I decided that the responsible thing to do was to go and study a little bit further. And as I took this desire forward, one thing opened up after the other, and I kept going into deeper and deeper into the field of therapy and counseling. From art therapy, I went into sex-focused trauma therapy. From there, I went into institutional and legal work. I went into law and policy and public health related to sexual violence, and then, of course, came into my own practice simultaneously. So for me, sex therapy has not felt like a challenging decision. It has felt very natural. It's felt very organic. What has felt challenging is explaining what I do to my friends, some family members, to people outside of the field, because there's a lot of misconception here, and that has felt the most challenging for me. So the trauma timeline is a really, really powerful exercise. Often a lot of folks think that, it's okay, I've gotten over that incident, it doesn't really impact me. Or people will be in talk therapy for many, many years and will still not have a very concrete way of actually mapping their trauma. So a trauma timeline brings it all to paper and brings it in your control. So once you're able to see, once a person is able to see the different connecting points between what happened to them and how their current life may be mirroring some of those challenges, the insight is very different, because you just see it all for the first time connecting and you feel, wow, this is actually doable. This is within my control. I get to decide what I want to do next with my own narratives that have played out from what happened to me. So I get to heal my scars, essentially. If I can see and if I can name my scars, then I can heal my scars better, right? Because I get to see them all in one place. And this is where art therapy is so beautiful, because it really adds that color, the non-verbal richness, the metaphor, and the depth to my scars. Which then leads me to exercise 15 in the book, which is all about flipping the script. So once we realize, my gosh, this pain that I'm experiencing in sex is actually coming from the fact that I was assaulted when I was 4 and I couldn't tell my mother because she was not there. She was not available to me. She was busy in the kitchen, or in some cases she was being violated herself, and she wasn't really there for me. And I'm carrying this distrust of partnership still in my vulva or in my body. When these kind of insights happen, then one realizes that how much internalized shame and internalized narratives, trauma narratives, one is carrying. This can really lead to this is a significant point in inner work where one can really feel kind of motivated to do something about these narratives. And this is where flipping the script is really powerful, which is exercise 15. This is quite late in the book, and I'm hoping by this time readers will have done a lot of their own work to prepare themselves for this point in the journey. So if you're in therapy, your therapist will very gently lead you to this point. After much rapport building, you will get to this point where it's time to shift some of the pain into medicine. In an emotionally and sexually repressive, post-colonial, modern Indian society like ours, which is shifting its shape so quickly, I like to say that it's not people's fault that they don't understand what this profession is all about. The biggest misconception about this profession, because of popular depictions in mainstream media and all of that, is that it is somehow either sex advice related, like sexology, so medicalized in that way, so like a doctor giving sex advice, or it is like sex work. And these are the two kind of extremes where people think sex therapy lives, when in fact sex therapy is all about the gray and the shades of relationships in the center. So it's not at all about giving advice. When you see a psychotherapist, I wish for a lot of people to know that it's all about gaining back agency and power where you lose agency and power. So a psychotherapist is not going to give you advice, and a sex-focused psychotherapist is really, really not going to give you advice. Instead, they will probably sit with you and learn about what all has happened in your life until now and what is impacting, what past event is impacting whatever the present challenge in your life is. So that's one. The second biggest misconception comes from the sleaze factor, that it's a sleazy profession to get into, that somehow clients are inherently going to try to cross one's boundaries, etc. No, this does not happen as often as people think it does. This is not a sleazy profession at all. In fact, it is bringing maturity, wisdom, and balance into a very taboo and hidden area of life where there is so much shame in India to just talk about it, to talk about not only the sexual pleasure part, but very importantly, the sexual harm part. So what a psychotherapist, a sex-focused psychotherapist, a sex therapist does is they bridge the gaps between the trauma and the present part, which is what I'm repeating again. It's a lot about helping people make sense of what happened in their life, why they're experiencing challenges in sexual satisfaction, in not being able to really enjoy that part of their life, feeling afraid of this part of their life, not feeling in control of this part of their life, etc., etc. You know, please take this from me. Fear and shame are normal byproducts of living in an emotionally, sexually, and mentally repressive society and social state. Okay, socially, a state of when a society is in a state of illness, it doesn't help to shame yourself for having symptoms of that illness. Okay, but what can really help is to take gentle baby steps of compassion, self-compassion, and to not force yourself out of these states, but to really understand why you're scared. Where does your fear come from? Where does your shame come from? And then very gently re-script and reframe your narratives. Like a mother taking a child through a parenting process, you have to re-parent yourself, to use a popular term, and you have to be that gentle but compassionate and firm mother to your own self and bring yourself out of these states. So I repeat myself, forcing yourself is not going to help. This is what I would like to tell anyone who is listening and reading. Something I always say, that it's important to remember that there are many approaches to trauma work. And one of the approaches I align myself to very closely in my work is Dr. Gabor Mate's definition of trauma, which is a bit more expansive than the more conventional definition of trauma. So my book takes a much more expansive stance as well, and kind of takes readers through a journey of understanding where systemic trauma comes in, where interpersonal trauma comes in, and how that manifests in shame-based narratives. So once readers are more aware of where their trauma comes from, they may be able to use the art-based creative visualization exercises and self-help techniques that are scattered throughout the book to kind of lead them to shifting those internalized narratives into more empowered and healing narratives. Thank you so much for offering me congratulations on this book, on Unashamed. I really honor and value that. You know, I am a spiritually focused person. I'm an existentially focused therapist. So I bring in a lot of psycho-spiritual techniques into my work. And one of those for me is writing. So writing is a really great way for me to, of course, connect the material realm and all the trauma stuff that happens in the material realm, but also to connect the astral realm and the material realm, and to see life from a little bit of a larger perspective. Because when you see so much pain every day, spirituality can be a really beautiful balm to kind of showing you the larger picture that is at play. So I I did have one significant memory, that came to mind when I was thinking about one of the reasons I wrote this book. Is when I was in college, I was coming out as queer, and I was luckily surrounded by an incredible group of older queer women who always protected me. But I also experienced a lot of bullying and harassment in ways that I wish nobody should experience, but also in physical ways. And I was assaulted by one of my seniors in college, and he was very adamant that, he was not homophobic and that he would fix me as I was coming out as queer, and he displayed some very blatant and extremely terrifying acts of homophobia. And so after I was assaulted at a party that we were all at, I went home and I told one of my aunts who was visiting at the time. And her first reaction was to kind of totally ignore and dismiss the story. She got kind of very uncomfortable, and she focused on if I would like to eat something and what that would be and what she should make for dinner. And while it was such a caring response on her end, it was absolutely the wrong response. I didn't care about what I wanted to eat. I really wanted to be valued and supported and believed. And in many ways, in childhood, my parents had always believed me. So I knew what the right response should be, but it wasn't coming from her. And at that time, it really clicked in my head, as a young person, that my gosh, when a survivor discloses something so drastic, sometimes we trigger another person's shame, because the other person hasn't really looked at that shame in themselves. So how are they going to know how to support us in our time of need, especially when it's about a triggering, difficult, complex topic? So it just somewhere registered in the back of my mind that someday I will offer a tool to the Indian public that will really throw light on the complexity of this subject and possibly offer solace and some very concrete steps forward on how to handle a disclosure and why sexual trauma needs a certain kind of compassion and inner work already that people should have done for themselves to be able to be present for their daughters, sons, friends, employees, anybody else who is disclosing this level of harm. Yeah. So that prayer and that kind of inner knowing has now manifested in Unashamed, and for that I'm so grateful. Through my work, I stay away from explicit sex education. That is not what my personal work is about. My work is a lot about shining light on the systemic aspects of sex therapy. So I get into the law, the politics, the public health part of sex and sexuality, especially in India, where I practice a lot. So, people don't realize that I have to go to court a lot, especially if I'm assisting with domestic violence cases where there has been sexual abuse, or in incestual abuse cases where I'm assisting the mother when the perpetrator was someone in the family, or I'm assisting the child when the perpetrator was someone in the family. So a sex therapist's job comes along with the law part of it. So you're supposed to be aware, you're supposed to be informed. And this is where I do a lot of writing around these topics to kind of build awareness that it's not just about the acts of having sex. In fact, those are the smaller aspects of our work. Our work is much more expansive than that. So both in my larger public work and also in my book Unashamed, I speak about why sex positivity cannot be just this blanket statement that we kind of throw on a lot of our Indian readers and society and expect people to just perform sex positivity. Why in a relational culture like ours, it is very difficult to get to that point. Sexual liberation is not this hyper individualistic concept. It is something that comes with the challenges of our territory, and hence it's a little bit deeper than just applying a blanket slogan on our culture. So that's one. And also, all through the book, I've divided my book into 4 parts. The first 2 parts of the book are looking at the roots of shame. So where does sexual shame come from? I name schools, I name bullying, I name, childhood sexual abuse, and how all of that trauma, when it's unlooked at, leads to internalized shame-based narratives. And then the next two parts of the book are about readers taking a step deeper into healing that part. Of course, I do recommend that if you have a psychotherapist already, this book will really help your journey, 10 times more. But it's also written for people who don't have access to psychotherapy or psychotherapists and are able to see at least like where their trauma lives and how they may fare in this large, complicated, enmeshed concept of trauma. I wish people were sitting where I'm sitting, because I am seeing a wave of information hunger in ways that I just have not seen before. And it's, of course, we can thank technology to this, the changing times and just growing exposure. But there is this need in the younger generation of Indians placed anywhere in the world for authentic depth, deep information, deep self-information and deep information about relationships and marriage and the right decision and good sexuality and sexual health and mental wellness. And these topics that were really kind of in the shadows are really coming out big time. So a lot of my colleagues in the field, a lot of researchers in the trauma therapy field also predict that we're kind of heading towards a mental health epidemic. And while my seatbelts are fastened for that, I also feel really endeared to report that there is a lot of growing desire in people for just authentic information. So a lot of conversations are already happening, whether it's on social media or between friends in the younger generation. But in the older Indian generation, of course, there's a little bit more hesitancy, but because parents are seeing their younger members of the family really want information, I also have a lot of parents, in-laws, wanting to empower themselves with the right information. So this is a great step forward. This is an amazing step forward. I do think systemically we have a lot of work to do, and one of my major contributions is to empower younger counselors, therapists, nurses, doctors, especially those who are in smaller tier cities and towns in India and abroad, who may want information but do not have access to it. So how do we train younger counselors to be able to equip their clients and their students with the right information and not shame them and not end up causing more harm if someone discloses a trauma story and things like that. So that is one big advocacy piece. And the second piece that really comes to mind is just more realistic trauma and relational awareness in schools. It doesn't have to be explicit, sex advice, because our culture is still growing into that a little bit, and forcing that on schools and demanding that may not really work here. But what can work, and some of our CBSE schools are doing that, is that they're coming up with very realistic textbooks which are talking about like the positives and negatives of a relationship and what green flags are and what red flags are, and how your partner should not be disclosing your personal private information to others. They should not be putting your personal pictures on social media. All this is very, very empowering and endearing for teenagers to know, and this is literally where I do see that this is the way forward. I'm very heartened by this.